In this video, I will show you how to upgrade the fork spring of the CRF250L on a budget. So, the reason you may want to upgrade the fork spring of the CRF250L is if you find the stock forks under-sprung or too soft for your weight or riding style. This is an example of an aftermarket fork spring upgrade kit you can buy. These kit works by adding an additional spring to the left CRF250L fork. The CRF250L in stock form does not have a fork spring on the left fork. These are the fork spring that came from a Honda CB500 bike. I got it dirt cheap from the bike wrecker, salvage yard. The plan is to put these springs to the CRF250L forks and see if it improves the performance of the front suspension. The outside diameter of these springs is 35 mm and will fit inside the CRF250L fork tube. I am originally thinking of installing only one spring and make a spacer just like the aftermarket spring kit. However, I found out that the combined length of the two CB500 fork springs is the right length that will fit the CRF250L without a spacer. So, I decided to try and drop the two springs one on top of the other to the CRF250L left fork and see how it feels. I am welding the two springs together so that I can pull it out one time. I made two tack welds and now the two CB500 springs is just like one long, continuous spring. To begin, I put the bike on a stand. The stand that I made for the CRF250L is very stable and especially good when the work involves removing a wheel off the bike. I don't have to worry about the bike falling down while one of the wheels is off. As you can see, the length of the two springs combined is about the same length of the forks. I then remove the handle bar and set it aside without removing the cables. This will give me some room to remove the fork cap and install the additional spring later. You don't have to do this if you are removing the fork from the triple clamp. But I found that it is easier if I do this modification without having to remove the forks from the bike. Saves time, and since I thought that I have to do this several times while experimenting with the correct length of spring. Next, I remove the front wheel. There are two 12 mm bolts on the right fork and the front wheel axle will require a 17 mm wrench. I then go ahead and unscrew the left fork cap. If you are unsure which is the left fork leg we are talking about, it is the one that have the front brake caliper. Once the fork cap is completely unscrewed, I simply pull it out. It is still connected to the damper rod, so I use a vice grip to hold the damper rod in place while removing the fork cap. There is a jam nut that will require a 14 mm wrench. The fork cap will require a 17 mm wrench to disconnect from the damper rod. You can see that the end of the spring fit perfectly with the fork cap. If you don't hold the damper rod with a vice grip, it will fall down the fork tube. I have to tie a piece of wire to the damper rod so that I can pull the damper rod out when I remove the vice grip. Then I insert the end of the wire into the spring. I remove the vice grip and the spring drop down inside the fork tube. I can now pull on the wire as I insert a wrench to push the spring below the damper rod nut. I then reinstall the fork cap to the damper rod using at 14 mm and 17 mm wrenches. The fork cap needs a 30 mm wrench to screw into the fork tube. Then I put the handlebar and front wheel back to the bike. This modification only takes about 15 minutes to do. I will take it for a spin and see how it feels. If I need to have it stiffer, I can easily cut some length of the spring and replace with a spacer. If you can find a fork spring that will fit inside the CRF250L fork tube, then you can try this simple modification that will potentially improve the performance of the front suspension without spending a lot of money. Thank you for watching.